All right. Welcome. Thank you for being back with us. What a long day. I appreciate your sticking with it, but what a really wonderful day. So this afternoon, in our last session of the day, we are talking about reimagining education programs for this fall. We are led by Jenny Toutant, who has a new title, Chief Engagement and Education Officer at Milwaukee Repertory Theater, and Pamela De Pasquale from Education Director at Cleveland Playhouse. Thank you both for leading and all of the planning that you've done for this session. And I'm gonna step back and turn it over to you all.
Thank you, Lori. Hi, my name is Pamela De Pasquale. I use she, her, hers. I just wanted to acknowledge that in Cleveland, we are on the traditional lands of the Wyandot, Mingo, Seneca, Cayuga, and Onondaga people. And we are excited to talk today about what's going on in our education departments, how COVID-19 has played a part in dismantling many of our departments, especially as I talk to my colleagues across the country, you know, losing staff, losing teaching artists, in losing colleagues outside of the education department as well. At Cleveland Playhouse, we had a diverse enough funding portfolio to retain our full-time and year-round and seasonal education staff, but we did have to let go of all of our part-time and contracted staff, which was upwards of 30 different people and partners, and acknowledging that for many of those people, especially those who supported our programs within the schools, they are people who identify as color, people who identify as a lower socioeconomic class, and in some cases, people who identified with low educational attainment, and recognize that there was no, I'm trying to find the right word, no matter how much we wanted to keep them, finances did not allow it. And when finances are a struggle, often the most vulnerable of our population are the ones to be left behind and let go. I know I'm saying that on behalf of Cleveland Playhouse, and I would imagine many of you are feeling and saying that on behalf of your own organizations. So as we're thinking about COVID-19, I just wanted to share that, so Dr. Adam Brown from NYU Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry explains that childhood trauma often involves a negative reaction called traumatic stress, following an overwhelming, upsetting, or frightening experiences that challenge a child's ability to cope. He then says that COVID-19 can potentially be a traumatic event for some children, while for others, it might not be. And as you might imagine, it's the circumstances of their lives that help to either mitigate those traumas or play a part in them. But if we are practicing trauma-informed care across all of our classrooms, we should assume that every child we encounter in the fall is experiencing stress. More importantly, the American Academy of Pediatrics named racism as a public health emergency. Racism is considered a fundamental cause of adverse health outcomes for racial ethnic inequities in health. And cultural racism has been found to be uniquely predictive of post-traumatic stress syndromes. We cannot forget that or acknowledge that. And as we start moving in to rebuild, reimagine, rethink how we show up in the fall for our students, we absolutely have to think about what our students have been experiencing and continue to be experiencing, but also what is our staff experiencing, and how do we help, and help is the wrong word, how do we support everyone across our organization to show up while we work together to break down systems that didn't allow people to fully show up in the first place. So some of the things we're going to think about today is, how do we rebuild with equity in mind? What is happening at our theaters that impact our work and education? And what is the role in holding ourselves and our organizations responsible? And I'm going to turn it over to Jenny to talk about the bigger picture of the fall.
Yeah, so I mean, we're really interested today in having a dialogue then with all of you. I'm Jenny. I know Lori just introduced us, from Milwaukee Rep. And, you know, like echoing what Pamela said as well, you know, we've also had some staff changes, which is hence my new title. We actually eliminated our community engagement department and have combined both education and engagement into one department. So now I am overseeing both divisions right now, but that did result in a reduction of force on our end as well. We have been actually, as sad as that is, we've also been very fortunate in our theater company that we were able to somehow get away with just laying off 8% of our staff right now. But it was a very difficult decision to be able to move those departments to one. And how do we continue to center engagement and education as key priorities of our theater companies when also the attention is now on us all, because we're the ones producing work still. We're the ones that are still in the schools or virtually doing virtual programs and collaborating with the artistic teams to make sure that our virtual content continues throughout this. Right now, all of a sudden, something that we might have just done for a small group of teenagers becomes something that might be of interest for the public. So really having to rethink how we deliver our education programs and what is now becoming even more centered in our theater companies as we're not producing plays right now. So, you know, I think what we really want to look at is what that bigger picture of what does education then look like in the fall, beyond the conversation of effectiveness of virtual platforms. I'm sure everybody on this call has now had different experiences with either Zoom or Google Classroom and all of that. And, you know, we can have side conversations some other day, email us, we can, you know, figure that out. Let's think about that deeper picture of what is the reality of the world right now and how it impacts how we reshape our education programming to meet the needs of the world at hand right now. Yeah, that's what I'll say about that. That's what I'll say about that, because there's a lot of needs right now. And there's a lot of, you know, as Pamela said, there's a lot of trauma right now. And, you know, and we have a responsibility at our theater companies and in our departments to be mindful of that and not ignore it and not try to keep the status quo. So some of us might be continuing programs that we've been doing and just shifting them to a virtual platform or a blend of in-person and virtual, or going in person but socially distancing, and what that looks like, and how do we keep our teaching artists and our students safe in that new world and environment. And some of us might be having to design absolutely new programming to meet the needs of what our current world is looking at. So, you know, and how are we making sure and ensuring that we are doing this with an ED&I lens. So I'm going to let Pamela then introduce our guest facilitator then for that part of the session. The way that we're going to work the session out today, before I actually punt it back to you, we're going to, Jenna, the guest facilitator, she is going to talk a bit about the framing of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then we're going to go into a conversation around ED&I that happens in our institutions as it relates to education. So, you know, what is happening institutionally and how your involvement is with that. She'll frame those questions, and we'll go into breakout rooms to talk about that. We'll come back here for a very brief reflection, and it'll be a bit of a different reflection model than what we've been doing for the last couple of sessions. And then we're going to go back into breakout rooms very quickly thereafter to discuss now how do we take some of this information and move forward in reframing our education programs for the fall.
Wonderful. So Cleveland Playhouse has been working with Jenna Chandler Ward for the last months, both within the education department as well as the leadership group, to be able to begin the conversation around decentering whiteness in our organization. When we were talking about this session and how we needed to move forward, and that theater education should not move forward without an anti-racist lens. Jenny was open enough to say, hey, let's bring that facilitator in. So I'm going to turn it over to Jenna, and she's going to lead us through some questions and thoughts, and then send us into breakout rooms. So thank you, Jenna.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to be here today. I started as an education director many years ago in a theater company with Pamela, many, many years ago. So I feel like you are my people. I have been an educator in lots of different forms for about 20 years, and eventually became more and more focused on how identity impacts teaching and learning, and started a few different projects, one of them being the Multicultural Teaching Institute, which is a conference and workshops for teachers. And then more specifically started to think about race intentionally, and in particular whiteness, and the ways that it's not named. And started another organization called Teaching While White, to acknowledge that usually when we're talking about racial issues, racial equity, we are usually scrutinizing Black and brown students, colleagues, families, and never talking about the context that that all operates in, that most institutions, certainly educational institutions, were created for and by white people. It is the baseline from which most things are judged. And we can't have a discussion about equity without discussing the context that it is trying to exist within, and how do we dismantle some of that, or become conscious of it enough to start to move away from centering whiteness all the time. And white people are always like, you're a diversity person. Yes, we need more white people leading this work. People of color, especially right now, are tired. And it shouldn't be on the shoulders of Black and brown folks to carry this work. And that doesn't mean that I speak for or in isolation as a white person. I work in principled relationships and accountability with folks of color and in solidarity. And it is also, I feel my responsibility to help to lead this work myself. So there's a quote I have above my desk, and I can talk more specifically if people have questions later. But I have a quote over my desk that's from an educator called Paul Gorski, and it says, "What are the knowledge and skills I need to be a threat to inequity within my sphere of influence?" So I want to be thinking today, the reason I keep that quote is that to remind myself that I need knowledge and skills. Sometimes as a white person, I want to rush and fix things. And it is actually very nuanced and difficult work, that it requires knowledge and skill. That is not to slow the process down, but to make sure that I'm being thoughtful and intentional. And then to remember that it's not okay to just be an ally, to be non-racist. We need to be anti-racist. So I need to be a threat to inequity within my sphere of influence. And thinking about, what tables do I sit at? Where do I have the ear of leadership? Where can I show up and use the privileges I have to make a difference and within my sphere of influence? And I say stand in solidarity because part of this work is for white people to understand that racism has a cost for us as well. And it's not anything close to the same, but that racism harms everyone. So we're not working for or speaking for, that we are standing in solidarity, speaking from our own understanding of how racism negatively affects us as well. So looking at institutions And we think about the role of, you know, all these letters, DEI and inclusion, and who, you know, I talk about belonging because I don't really know what it means to be included. What's the difference between inclusion and belonging? And what's diversity? Is that code for race? So part of it is to clarify, what is it we mean? And when I work with institutions, a lot of time they'll say, well, we really want to work on our diversity. And I'll say, do you mean racial diversity? What do you mean by that? And oftentimes organizations can't articulate why, except that they know that they're supposed to, right? So that leads to a lot of confusion from the very top. If you can't articulate why racial diversity, justice, and equity matter to your organization, then it's impossible to lead the charge if you aren't clear about that. And also within organizations, how that gets communicated, right? It's sort of like in some statement, maybe on a website, maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. How is a organization's commitment to racial justice communicated to the community within the organization, to all the different constituents? And is it clear? Because without that clarity, it's really difficult to move forward. And so thinking about how we then, once we can clarify what it is that is important to us as organizations and institutions, how do we then create a culture where people feel able to engage in that, particularly white folks when we're talking about race, who I talk about racial literacy. It's like any other literacy. And oftentimes white folks have not developed a literacy around race that most folks of color have been forced to create and learn. So how do we catch up, and how do we create an environment where we have authentic and real conversations that engage in the depths and complexities of racial issues that have haunted this country since it became a country? And how do we create a culture where it's okay to make mistakes, that we want to encourage vulnerability? White people are terrified. I think the Pew Research Center, apart from public speaking, I think fear of being called a racist was like #2 for white people. It is deep, it's profound. So how do we as organizations sort of encourage that vulnerability, that risk taking, and what are we doing to set that up to be successful? So that's one of the things we're thinking about. Sometimes that's about developing common language as an organization, or developing protocols and or guidelines for discussions, ways that people can give feedback without fear of retribution, that there's some structures in place to allow that process to develop and to strengthen. And then when we talk about racial literacy and we want to have this, and this is important to our organization, wanting it and, you know, hoping it happens. Hope is not a strategy, right? So what are we doing to support the folks within our organizations to develop those skills and to hold them accountable, right? So just as if a teacher would say, I refuse to use a computer, that wouldn't be permitted, right? At this date and point in time, in my opinion, it shouldn't be optional to have racial literacy skills. It just shouldn't be. It should be part of what's accepted and is the norm. And so just as though we were opening up a new platform for technology, we would say, okay, it is an expectation that you will utilize this technology in your world, your education, and we will give you support to be able to utilize it and figure it out. We're not going to just leave you to figure it out. And we're also going to support you to learn that, and you're also going to be held accountable to that. And where does that live within an organization to say, this is an expectation, we're going to support your growth and development to gain these skills, and then you're going to be held accountable for knowing that. Because at a certain point, we can't just have people digging in saying, oh, that's not me, that's not what I do improv, that has nothing to do with equity, right? So how do those structures live in an organization to support real, meaningful, systemic change? And so I sort of inadvertently talked through some of these questions you're going to be wrestling with in your small groups. So how clear is the role and value of equity and racial diversity within your organization? And how does that apply to your educational programming? Do you feel like it's clear? Is it clearly communicated? And what are some strategies that could clarify and communicate that commitment to racial justice more clearly? What are some strategies to put in place? What is the organizational culture around risk-taking and vulnerability? How could this be utilized or expanded to increase a willingness to engage in difficult conversations about race? They aren't easy ever, and we still have to have them. And how can your organization incorporate racial literacy as an expectation and support the professional development that people would need to support the expectation? So all those things that I mentioned, thinking specifically within your education departments, how are we going to make real meaningful change in the education in your organizations? How are we going to hold folks accountable? How are we going to gain the skills and knowledge? Somebody asked me to repeat the quote. What are the skills and knowledge I need to be a threat to inequity within my sphere of influence? And that's Paul Gorski. So that's what we're going to be thinking about. I see a couple questions before we go.
No, those are, I just
Perfect.
put all the questions in that you stated.
Nothing, excellent.
So yeah, this is a lot. I mean, there's a lot of questions and we only have about 20 minutes-ish to be able to discuss this, maybe 25. So if we can get into those breakout groups, we'll be in rooms of 5. And then, you know, tackle what you can, you know, reread those questions as a group. And if you need to change the order of it, decide on, you know, if you're going to focus on just one question or 2 questions, or split it up and have about 5 minutes per question that you're timing yourself on is fine as well. We'll give you about a 5-minute warning before we bring you back to the full group then. Great, so I think we can go ahead and put us into groups actually, because we are slightly ahead. Why don't we go ahead and say we will be in this group for 25 full minutes and go from there. Thanks.
Sorry about that. I just made a mistake in creating the breakout rooms. Give me 1 second.
Sam, I don't see Allison on here anymore. Are we still trying to get us into breakout groups? What is happening?
Sorry, I think, yeah, Allison is, I think her mic is a little quiet, but I think she's just, Allison, don't.
Allison is the TCG logo and she's working on it as far as I can tell.
I apologize. I was creating a new breakout room for the hosts and teaching artists, and I realized that it then didn't put everyone else in room. So I'm going to close that and start again. I apologize.
Okay. You can put us in the rooms as well. We're happy to continue with the conversation. So.
So if any of the facilitators do not want to enter a room, they can just deny the request. So don't worry about it, Allison.
Right.
Okay, hold on, folks. Allison, do you just want to assign me host and I can jump on in? Great. Give me 1 second, folks. Hi, Juliet. Oh, hi, Juliet. Hi, Jenna. Great, glad you made it back. I was like, I don't know if some people heard. You're muted, you're muted.
We didn't get the option to click in. We just got zoomed there. So then I exited my group.
Okay, great. Okay. Interesting. Sorry, maybe I didn't unclick that function. But it looks like it's good. I'm gonna message facilitators if you want to come back to the main room. Just click. Yes. So, I set it for a 20-minute timer. We can bring people back whenever we need, just so you both know. Yeah.
It's fine with me.
Yeah, I think 20 minutes sounds about right, because anything longer than that, they're just going to get tired and off topic.
Yeah.
I hope I made sense. I've been up since 5:30 and going since our first meeting at 9.
Yep. You did great.
I was like, am I speaking words? I think.
Hi, Julie. It looks like you might just be joining us.
I am. I didn't know I'd end up in a breakout room.
No worries. Folks are in breakout rooms. They're there for like 20 minutes. We just started, and we're having some brilliant, I think, conversation, hopefully, about anti-racism and anti-oppression work within the role of the education director and teaching artist within our theater structure, how we hold each other accountable, how we make sustainable systems. Everybody has those questions and prompts, but I can toss you into a breakout room so you can get into the meat of that discussion if you feel ready.
I'm ready. Let's just,
Awesome. I'm gonna assign you to a room that has some few people. Have so much fun. You just have to click join a breakout room. Yeah, Jenna, you make so much sense. Are you kidding me? I was note taking and I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. I'm so glad this is a discussion we're having. And I think, yeah, I've been thinking a lot during this crisis about how, just like the question of labor and like who's doing the labor. And, I think the one thing that struck me is like, yes, I am interested in like white people taking on the labor to have this discussion in terms of like how the system changes. But then the other thing that I'm finding like difficult to balance in an industry where I think there are more white people who recognize they need to do that labor, is also that like when we consider that this is like a room of education directors, it's like how many of them are white people, and actually and what is the role for anybody who has access to this kind of power to also seed that power and bring up new folks, which I think like goes beyond just education departments. But I keep thinking about that when this conversation comes up.
And hiring practices, absolutely. I hope that's one of the things we're going to end up addressing at Cleveland Playhouse. But I just was talking to a district in Washington, D.C. I think that was like half an hour ago. I'm not really sure. But all the white people are like, well, the people of color say they don't want to lead this work. So what are we supposed to do? And I was like,
Do it.
like, I could throw something. Guess what? It's not their job.
No.
Yeah.
We, Jenna worked with us early this morning, but also yesterday as well. And then a follow-up conversation with one of the people who was in the group yesterday, and they were struggling. Well, I've always heard that you know, the phrase "nothing about us without us," and where is the line between, you know, white people doing the work or you know, widening the circle. And this particular person needs to do so much work themselves first about owning their whiteness that there's plenty to do without.
It's just a form of deflection. Yeah.
Exactly.
But it is such a fine line too, I'm finding, because yeah, I don't think this is like too much, because I don't think it's about like confidentiality. I think TCG is moving towards like a mode of transparency, but TCG is an institution that's like on its anti-racist journey. For instance, like we had a ton of leaders who wanted to make a decision about the pivot of the conference last week and centering Black lives in this moment and centering BIPOC and centering sessions that like dismantle white supremacy. And there was this like, just like a lot of theaters have done, there was this statement written, and that was composed first without any sort of consultation, particularly with Black staff. As a Black staff member, like we weren't told. And it was this weird thing that I'm like, I'm great. I know that the thought was, let us not put this labor on our Black staff members. And I think that is right. But I also wonder like how you still have, I thought like I was so hurt to not be included and not be like, because I mean, like, I wouldn't work in a predominantly white institution if I wasn't ready to also take on that kind of labor as well. So it is such a fine balance, and I don't know how to. I mean, I think I struggle to like make sure that everybody who needs to be included in the conversation.
What if it had started with white folks and said, we've started something recognizing that we have blind spots and also not wanting to, you know, require that all faculty or all staff of color take on this role. We're inviting folks to step in and look at what we've done so far to make sure we're, I don't know, something, and I don't know, would that feel different to you?
Yeah, no, that would feel totally different. I think that's what I wanted. And they recognize, I think that's the other thing, is like, they totally were like, wow, I can't believe we did that. Like another, you know, like just it is a blind spot. Right? It was also like good to see it accounted for. But it is just one of those things in the process that is very difficult to name, I guess. Yeah. Because it's hard to even like make sure you're using the right words so that you're still not putting labor on those people. Because, you know, there's sometimes you ask folks to do that and say like, we want to bring you into the conversation, but that actually, like the way that you ask is also just putting more labor onto these folks.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And understanding that you're not going to speak for all the Black people in the world. We would like to maybe, I don't know, invite some other community members to the table who, I don't know, anyway.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Juicy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we had like an hour and a half conversation today amongst a group in our organization about transparency, and it's not enough for leadership, which is white, to be doing the planning and waiting until they, the planning is just perfect before they share, the steps that we're taking towards becoming an anti-racist institution. That you've got to stop hiding the steps and be transparent about it. So folks who are working across the organization know what their part is to play, what's expected of them, and that the work is actually being done. Because when we keep it all close to our vest and try and deal with our own fragility and emotions with it, it doesn't help anybody but the people who are trying to hold it close.
Yeah. Yep. There's so much work to do right now. I mean, always, but
Right.
that's the other thing, the urgency of white people right now. I just want to be like, but this has always been the case.
Right.
That's so real. It's funny because I feel like I'm watching some of my friends really burn out already. I shared a resource on Instagram, I think it was like a thread for white people that was like, just remember, it's a marathon. Here are some ways that you can just we're not gonna fix, like, it's actually a joke that I have amongst some of my Black peers particularly, is like, anytime we do something that we're like, that moves towards dismantling, we're like, oh, so we fixed it. Like, we just solved racism, right? The whole thing. Like, the thing is, like, these moves, they're cracks. They're good. They're in the right direction. But we're not dismantling this system in the next 3 weeks even. Like, it's not possible. We're talking about like systemic change. So I appreciate that framing of this conversation even. It's about like actually what are the tangible steps that we take as an industry to make sure that we're moving towards dismantling.
Yeah.
Rather than just like, okay, how do we include Black and Indigenous people of color now, and then like in a couple of years when all of this blows over, or whenever people finally are in this moment, we can just like chill and have our white place again.
Exactly.
So scary. So scary. I had one colleague say to me, well, it couldn't be better that we're doing this work with Jenna right now. It's just perfect timing. And I want to be like, really? Really? Because I would have said we're 104 years old. There was a lot of time here in this organization to do this work.
So that in the crisis, we weren't.
Exactly. We were already prepared.
Yeah, you should have said it. That's hilarious.
Oh, I said it.
Yeah, this is a 400-year conversation. Like, this is like the birth of our nation. Since the birth of our nation, people have been having this conversation.
Yeah. But to your point, Pamela, when white people figure it out, they think they discovered it, right? Like, that's the whole Columbus idea.
Yeah, we had, Jenna and I had that conversation the other day. It's like, as somebody is like, oh, goodness, wait, I'm going to start and change the world. I'm going to smash that, whatever it is. Not today. And I remember having that same like moment, but yeah.
There's a great cartoon of a white person being like, oh my gosh, this is exhausting. And a person probably being like, oh no, we just start like pointing like at the end. We have a lot.
Like, welcome to the club.
And I think there was an Onion where there's this white woman on a couch with a glass of red wine. She's like, 5 days of protesting is exhausting.
For real. Oh, I don't need it again. I think that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a paper in Louisville that said, oh, tired from protesting, here's where to get a good martini. And like, what?
Yeah, I don't know if this conversation is reminding me of I don't know. Obviously, I feel like I spend a lot of time thinking about this work, and um, it is not the right impulse for white people to center themselves and be like, yes, like now I can do this, like I figured it out. Oh my goodness. And yet it is also how it begins and how it needs to begin. I don't know if you've read ever Eating the Other by Bell Hooks.
A long time ago. I'm a big fan of hers.
Totally. It's one of those essays that just like has had a huge impact on me when I read it. And so I feel like it's been foundational to like the way that I think about allyship specifically. But she says in that essay that like she's like the best version of an ally that exists is like Tracy Turnblad from Hairspray, whose whole arc is about like relating the otherness of black, like the capital O otherness of blackness to what it is to be a fat white woman in the world. She's like, I experience otherness too, and therefore these people are also human. Like that is Bell Hooks like defines her as the best ally. Not the right ally, but the best version. And I do wonder, like, it is kind of like how it all begins. Is like white people finally recognizing that there's something in it for them too. Yeah. I'm excited to
I
get
haven't read that article yet. Sorry. Go ahead.
No. I'm just excited to get to the point where like I don't know when it's gonna come or if it's ever gonna come, but like when more white people understand that like actually like dismantling the system will mean like giving up a lot. Like it will mean like stepping down from positions of power and doing like active work to mentor like core, queer, trans, black, indigenous people of color to come up and like take over these institutions. Like that's at least like how I envision the future of our industry and like every industry really. But I don't know when we're gonna get there or how or if or all.
Yeah, and also just redefining leadership. It's a conversation I've been having a lot with colleagues. It doesn't, your definition of leadership is a white definition of leadership, and you thinking that you have to make all the decisions and you are responsible for everybody here is wrong. So what is it that you have to change about your definition of leadership and how you lead to be inclusive, or to the better word, to make sure everybody belongs? And when everybody belongs, they all rise together to make something better.
Yeah. I'm gonna wake up my daughter because she's asleep and she has to graduate high school in like an hour, so I'll be right back.
Oh my God, what an exciting day at home. Oh, just graduation in an hour.
Exactly.
Wow, I love that. FYI, people will be joining us in about 4 minutes now.
Great, thank you.
I'd also like to remind all of us that that whole conversation was just recorded.
Oh gosh. It's not going to be broadcasted anywhere though, right?
No, we're not broadcasting right now. I think it's for archive and it's for other education directors, but I realize that since we're in the main room, it's our discussion that's the one getting recorded. But I don't think it's bad. I don't think we said anything wrong.
Can you like cut that part out?
Yes.
Actually, you can.
Yes.
Liza and I recorded a conversation and I edited it.
Okay. Please do.
Let Lori know before we send these away. Don't worry.
Thank you.
Good, I didn't say all the other stuff.
But I don't know. Maybe they need to hear the thoughts.
Maybe.
I've said my thoughts to the people who need to hear them, but at the same time, I don't think they want me to broadcast what I've said.
You can leave me in. People, white people, if you're tired, remember, you're white tired, okay?
There you go. I have some of my staff members participating today, so I'm purposely not going into the breakout room so they can be fully present without worrying about the power structure at play.
Gotcha. Sam, where are you in the country?
I'm in New York.
Oh.
City. Yeah, Harlem. I moved here right before COVID.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow.
I was at Baltimore Center Stage as one of the artistic fellows there. It was amazing. And then I saw this job and I was like, this feels right. Like, this feels like a good solid step in the next direction. And so I moved in February to take this seasonal gig. And then COVID-19 shut down our offices and there was no longer a conference in Phoenix.
Wow.
Okay, it looks like we're gonna bring everybody back to. Allison, did you get a notification to come back or should I just close the rooms?
We just left the room, so
Close. Yeah, you can close it.
It should have been set up to notify everybody, but I guess it wasn't. I moved too quick.
I got the notification.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, but
okay.
yeah.
Oh, now it's saying that it's going to close in. Okay, everybody else that's still in a breakout room is still going to have 60 more seconds.
Okay.
I love technology.
You saw the seconds go down. We're like, well, are we going to get pulled back in, or are we going to go ourselves, or what? Yeah. Welcome back. We still have other rooms coming back. I think that's everyone, right? Excellent. Welcome back, everyone. So I hope you had some fruitful conversations. Instead of us doing a reflection with the raising hand function, I'm going to actually ask you all to take 3 minutes and type in your key takeaways into the chat function. Okay, so go ahead and do that now.
Everyone in your group?
If you would like to. And we didn't tell you to assign somebody. So you can do, if you've got a key takeaway that you would like to put into the chat function, please do. About 90 more seconds. This is great. Keep putting in any takeaways that you had from your conversation. And then take a moment as you're wrapping up to scroll through, start reading some of these takeaways. Think about how they might apply to you, what you align with, what you would like if somebody, posted this on social media, what you would question, what you would want to dig into, what you would want to research more of. I know that there's a video of recording of this session right now, but something I also enjoy about putting these takeaways in here, that it offers more voices for people who do not want to necessarily raise their hands. So this is if you're facilitating a Zoom session in your own theater companies or with your own education or engagement programming, this is another option to be able to get some feedback and takeaways and make sure that other people can share their voices. There's also a really great function at the bottom of this chat where there's that little ... If you do that, you can actually save the chat. So if you want to read some of these a bit later too and follow up, you have that option to do that. Great, we're going to go ahead and move on. We are going to actually go into yet another breakout group, and we're going to discuss some I think at least in my group, we had already started talking about how some of this already applies to our programming, but we didn't necessarily talk about how it's going to apply for our future programming. Right now, we're going to focus on how are we reshaping our education programs in the fall, and how are we doing that because of COVID, or in response to the current protests and movement that is happening right now in our world. So I'm going to post these questions in here. So our questions here: what strategies are you using to reimagine implementations of education programs with an ED&I or an anti-racist lens? I saw that comment before, to shift our language to anti-racist work, which I agree with. With an anti-racist lens, both continuing programs that you might be reshaping, as well as reimagined programs as a result of COVID-19. Okay, the next question to discuss here: how are education employees being held accountable for equity and racial justice systemically? Okay, so what is the annual goals, the job performance reviews look like? How are they being held accountable for that work in the community? Which sometimes we talk about it within our organizations and with our full-time staff, but not always with what is happening outside of our walls. So thinking about that as a part of the assessment tools. By understanding the institution's approach to anti-racist work, what is education's role in that, in creating new strategies and building competencies through professional development? How does your education department and its programming return stronger in the fall? Okay. So that is going to be our questions for this next set of breakout rooms. You're going to, again, have about 20 minutes here for that, and then we will come back into the room. So if we can break us out into small groups, again, doesn't have to be the same groups, can be randomized again into groups of 5.
Allison, do you want to pause the recording?
Bye, everybody.
All right, I think we are all back again. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a wonderful dialogue in your rooms, as I did. So once again, I would love for us to welcome the opportunity to take a few minutes to chat your takeaways into this chat box, into the chat function here. And then we will do the same thing. We'll read off a little bit, and then we should still have about 5 minutes left to open up the conversation if anybody does want to use that raise hand function for us to have a bit more of a dialogue. But feel free to use that chat function if you're not one that likes to speak in front of the group. So any reflections on that, go ahead and insert that into the chat function. Or if you really just want to speak aloud, you can use the raise hand function now. We'll give us 2 minutes to type in our takeaways into the chat. So we have a few responses in here. We'll have another minute or so to be able to continue typing in some responses here. I also want to take this moment as you all are reading through some of these responses to acknowledge that all of us are coming into a very different place. You know, the impacts of COVID-19 are drastic and are huge on many of our institutions and our theater companies and on our jobs. Some of us here are part-time, some of us are full-time, some of us have changing roles, some of us might be laid off, some of us might be furloughed right now, some of us aren't sure what that next part of our jobs look like or for our staff's jobs to look like. So I know it's difficult to have this conversation when there's still so much uncertainty. I've also heard in the room too that there's a, you know, I mean, some of these are things that we can control, right? That we control our own education programs, and some of us are completely out of control, where we're really reliant on the schools or our partners to make a decision on what it is. So we can't necessarily answer how we're going to reshape our education programming if we don't even know if we're going to be allowed to go back to schools, you know, or if schools are even going to be in sessions. Some of us may be taking a bigger hit as well, where we might still be having a whole nother round of layoffs coming at our theater companies. So I think this is a good starting point. You know, I feel like there's a lot of whiplash that's happening for a lot of people right now, and not knowing what is happening, what's going to happen next. And, you know, and those changes are likely to keep coming as we continue to move into this unknown territory right now. But I really appreciate this conversation, and I do think and believe that we as educators and theater companies, we are strong, you know, and we will be able to move forward and be able to move forward even more smartly. You know, maybe we all grew too fast, and this is like getting to our, okay, great, let's level out. We need to rethink, you know, and refocus, rethink, and move smarter through this, and making sure that we are doing this with the inclusion of more voices, particularly our Black and Brown voices that have often been excluded from these conversations. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to continue thinking and continue looking at how do we come out of this? What is going to be stronger for us in the end here? And hopefully we'll be stronger theater companies in a stronger field of theater as we do actually take action here and not just talk about and theorize what this might look like. So with that, we have about 5 minutes left here if we want to open this up for questions. I don't know, Pamela, if you have anything else that you want to add to this, but if we want to open up for questions or any burning dialogues, I think that would be a great use of these last few minutes here.
Yes, and just Jenna's still with us as well if there are questions for Jenna specifically too.
We were just that efficient.
Does everyone know how to use the hand raise feature? Yes. Hit that participant list and then click the raise hand.
Well, I think if we actually don't have any questions, it has been a long day on Zoom, so we could possibly wrap up a couple minutes early as well. I really look forward. I did save this chat function to my own computer. I cannot, because I didn't have a chance to read through all of the responses. I can't wait to read through all of these responses. It's been great being in dialogue with you all.